She came to bury her son with honor. Instead, she was held at gunpoint by a white officer right beside the flag she spent 30 years defending. General Celeste Monroe didn't just lose her child that day. She uncovered a powerful network trying to silence voices like his. How far would a grieving mother go to bring that truth into the light? If you believe justice should never come with conditions like this, share it and subscribe for more powerful stories. Now let's go back to the moment it all began. It was supposed to be a moment of honor, of final peace of a nation saluting one of its own. The air at Jefferson Memorial that morning felt heavier than usual, as though even the wind knew that grief had settled in. Rows of white folding chairs lined the manicured lawn, filled with men and women in uniform, veterans with rigid postures and civilians clinging to tissues. Flags fluttered softly above the ceremonial rifle team stood at perfect stillness, and at the very front, beneath a marble monument etched with valor, lay the flag-draped casket of Captain Elijah Monroe. General Celeste Monroe stood alone beside it, shoulders squared in her immaculate dress blues. Her eyes were dry but distant, as if the tears had long since drained somewhere the night she received the call. She looked like every bit the legend people whispered she was 3 decades in service, first black woman in her division to wear a star, the kind of leader soldiers remembered for how she stood when things got hard. But no amount of rank could steel a mother against the weight of a folded flag. The honor guard moved in unison, crisp and practiced. One soldier stepped forward with the triangular fold in both hands, extending it toward her. Celeste raised her hand in a slow, deliberate salute, her jaw clenched tight, the corners of her lips drawn, but not trembling. You could almost hear the silence pressing in on the crowd, cameras clicking quietly in the background as a nation watched one of its generals prepare to bury her only son. Then it happened. A shift in the energy barely noticeable at first. From the far right of the crowd, a figure moved, Officer Kurt Delaney badge glinting in the sun. Shoulders, rigid eyes locked on the general. He broke from the line, stepping across the manicured lawn with a purpose no one had authorized. Before anyone could understand what was happening, before protocol could catch up with reality, he was standing in front of her. And then the gun came out. Delaney didn't shout. He didn't ask. He simply raised the weapon, pressed it to Celeste's temple, and kept it there. A gasp rippled through the rows of mourners. The honor guard froze mid-step. The cameras didn't stop, and 20 uniformed officers standing not far behind him made no move to stop him. They just watched. Celeste didn't move. Not at first. Her eyes closed just for a moment, as if she were steadying herself. Maybe praying. Maybe remembering Elijah's laugh when he was 6. Maybe counting the number of men who had doubted her and how many of them had saluted her on their way out. Then she opened them slowly, deliberately, and shifted her gaze not toward the gun, but toward the flag still suspended in the soldier's hands. The silence was so complete, you could hear a bird shift on a branch overhead. Celeste lowered her hand from her salute, reached forward, fingers trembling only slightly, and touched the fabric. Her son's final symbol, the thing she came here for. The cameras caught everything. The officer's hand tightening on the grip, the red mark blooming at her temple where the barrel pressed into her skin, the muscles in her neck straining to keep her upright, her fingers outstretched, brushing the star-spangled cloth just as a single gunshot shattered the silence. The screen goes black, and before you can process what just happened, you're left asking the only question that matters. How did we get here? 3 days before the funeral, General Celeste Monroe stepped off a military transport plane into the thick Texas heat. The sun hit hard, but she barely noticed. Her uniform was crisp, her ribbons in place, but her eyes gave her away, tired, hollowed by grief, but holding together in that way only soldiers know how. She hadn't come to Houston as a leader this time. She came as a mother about to bury her son. The terminal buzzed with movement, but Celeste moved with quiet resolve, navigating the crowd like muscle memory. She presented her military ID at the checkpoint without hesitation. The young TSA agent looked at it, nodded, waved her through. Then someone else stepped in. He wasn't TSA nor airport security. He didn't need to be. Officer Kurt Delaney wore his authority like a weapon. His steps were too sure, his posture too stiff, like a man already rehearsed for conflict. He stopped just in front of her eyes, scanning her from boots to collar. "General Monroe," he said, as if testing how the title sounded coming from his mouth. She offered her ID again. Department of Defense clearance. Her rank clearly printed. Delaney didn't even glance at it. Instead, he leaned in, voice low enough that only she could hear it. A black woman in stars. "You must be joking." For a moment it was silent. Not because the terminal stopped, but because time seemed to stretch. Celeste didn't flinch. She didn't answer. She just stood straighter, let the air settle. But behind her eyes, something shifted. Before she could respond, a voice cut through from behind. "Excuse me, step away from my mother." Jasmine Monroe, sharp and composed, strode forward in heels that clicked with intent. Her black slacks and pressed blouse were simple, but her presence was anything but. She flashed her state attorney's badge as she moved between her mother and Delaney, calm but firm. "She's a decorated general on official orders. This is harassment. Step back." Delaney turned his attention to Jasmine, eyes narrowing slightly. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. But the threat was there just beneath the surface. "You're making this harder for her," he said quietly. "Maybe harder for you too." Jasmine didn't budge. But Celeste placed a hand gently on her daughter's wrist, her touch light but commanding. "Let it go," she said. It wasn't fear in her voice. It was calculation. Celeste had learned long ago that some battles weren't won by shouting. Delaney watched them a beat longer, then slowly stepped back, pulling out his phone. He turned just slightly enough to angle his face away from the crowd and spoke softly into the receiver. "Target confirmed. Gatekeepers will proceed." The words weren't meant for them. But Celeste heard every one of them. As he melted into the terminal, Jasmine turned to her mother, brow furrowed. "Gatekeepers?" she asked. Celeste didn't answer right away. She was still staring into the space where Delaney had stood. Her jaw set her mind turning faster than she let on. But something in her chest told her what she already suspected. This wasn't a routine stop. It wasn't a rogue officer showing his bias. This was something orchestrated, something larger. And someone had just marked her family like a target on a map. It was nearly midnight when Celeste sat alone in her son's bedroom. The room was untouched since the day Elijah deployed books, still lined the shelf, a folded hoodie on the back of his chair, the faint scent of cedar and aftershave clinging to the air like a memory that refused to fade. In her hand was a small, worn USB drive wrapped in a note written in her son's unmistakable scrawl. "If I don't make it back, give this to Mom." Her hands moved slowly, reverently, as she plugged the drive into her laptop. The screen lit up and a single folder opened without prompt. It was labeled simply "Inside the System." She clicked. The files inside were vast documents. Images, grainy screenshots, recorded calls, all meticulously organized. At first glance, it was hard to make sense of, but the deeper she read, the clearer the picture became. Elijah had been investigating something. Not just corruption or abuse of power, but an organized network, an underground movement operating within law enforcement itself. Dozens of incidents involving black military personnel were documented, routine traffic stops turned violent, unauthorized raids, unexplained disappearances. The term gatekeepers surfaced again and again, embedded in emails hidden in code referenced in briefings, and one name kept surfacing in the footnotes. Delaney, Kurt, sometimes listed as liaison, other times as observer. Once chillingly as situation neutralizer. Celeste scrolled in silence. Her breath slowed. Her jaw tightened. The same man who had cornered her at the airport was showing up in confidential briefings and field reports across state lines. Whatever Elijah had uncovered, it had gone deeper than she could have imagined. She clicked on the final file. It was a video. The thumbnail was blurry, but the moment she hit play, her son's face filled the screen. He looked tired but grounded, seated in what looked like a barracks room, the lighting harsh and sterile. There was no fear in his voice, only resolve. "Hey, Mom. If you're watching this, I didn't make it back. And I know this is a lot, but I need you to hear me out." He paused, rubbed the back of his neck like he always did when trying to explain something big. "They're not just rogue cops. This isn't about a few racists slipping through. It's a group. Organized. They call themselves the Gatekeepers. Their job is to track and silence black veterans they see as threats, especially the ones who speak out. They're inside the system, policing it from within. No oversight, no accountability. He looked down briefly, then back into the camera. I think what happened to Sergeant Knox in Georgia wasn't a mistake. And if something happens to me, it won't be either. There was a beat of silence before he added, "You always said to wear the uniform with honor even when the country didn't love us back. I tried, Mom. I really tried. But now I need you to carry this forward. Because this system is killing us from the inside." The screen faded to black. Celeste didn't move. She couldn't. The silence that followed was heavier than grief. It was truth dropped like a stone in the pit of her stomach. Behind her, Jasmine stood frozen in the doorway. She hadn't said a word, but her eyes were wet. Slowly, she stepped closer and sat beside her mother. They didn't look at each other. For a while, the only sound was the faint hum of the laptop. Then Jasmine whispered, her voice cracking around the edges, "Mom, I think Elijah was killed on purpose." Celeste looked ahead, not at the screen now, but at something beyond it. Something rising inside her, quiet, but unshakable. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was purpose. Elijah hadn't left her with grief. He had left her with evidence, and now she knew what she had to do. It was just past dawn when the knock came. Not loud, not hurried. Just 3 measured taps against the front door, steady enough to signal purpose, soft enough to make Celeste pause. She glanced at Jasmine, who was seated at the dining table, still combing through printed files from Elijah's drive. Neither of them had told anyone they were back in town. Not officially. Celeste opened the door cautiously. Standing there was a man in plain clothes, dark jacket, ball cap, low over his face. But the moment their eyes met, recognition sparked. "Officer Daniel Kwan," he said quietly. "Elijah and I served together. May I come in?" There was something about the way he held himself, alert, respectful, but worn down, that told Celeste he hadn't just come to offer condolences. They sat in the living room, curtains drawn. The light that filtered in was soft and uncertain, like the conversation that followed. Kwan didn't waste time. He didn't soften the edges. His words came clipped, like someone always looking over his shoulder. Elijah was onto something, and it wasn't just about the gatekeepers. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small folder. Inside were more documents, these marked with internal codes from federal task forces and deployment rosters. But they weren't just about police misconduct. They've embedded themselves deep, Kwan said. Not just precincts, court systems, intelligence, even parts of the military chain. Quiet placements, quiet removals. Anyone who pushes back disappears quietly or gets reassigned overseas. Celeste's fingers tightened around the folder. "You're telling me this is national?" Kwan nodded once. "It's not new. It's just never been documented this clearly until Elijah. And now they're hunting silence." In the quiet that followed, Jasmine entered the room, eyes sharp. She had heard enough to sense the shift in tone. "Who else knows?" she asked. Kwan looked at Celeste before answering. "There's someone else. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Harris. You served with him, General. Gulf War. He's still active, technically. But these days he works off books. Does favors for people the system forgot." Celeste blinked slowly. That name hadn't crossed her mind in years. Harris had been her closest second in command, a man who didn't say much but had a way of seeing the whole board before most people noticed a move had been made. If he was involved, this was bigger than Elijah's mission. This was war-level subtlety. Kwan continued. "He's agreed to help, but only from the shadows. We can't go public. Not yet. Too many ears in too many places." They discussed it for hours, laid out names, traced funding, compared files. By midday, it became clear that this wasn't just a network of rogue enforcers. It was an apparatus of quiet control, cloaked in bureaucracy, feeding off the assumption that no one would ever connect the dots. They decided to form a private task group. Just the 3 of them for now. They would monitor, gather more, cross-check quietly through trusted back channels. Everything off-grid. No digital trails. They weren't ready to confront the full force of the machine. Not yet. The timing had to be perfect. But the hunt had begun. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the house sank into that early evening stillness, Jasmine sat across from her mother, her voice low and edged with something new. "Mom," she said, "if they've managed to infiltrate the deployment chain, If they can influence which soldiers are sent where. She trailed off, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. Celeste didn't answer right away. She just looked down at the folder Quan had left behind. And for the first time since the funeral, she said it out loud. Elijah didn't just die in service. He was selected, placed, and then eliminated. Jasmine's voice broke just slightly. That means he never had a chance. Celeste closed the folder and stood. Her voice, when it came, was steady and razor sharp. Then it's our job to make sure they don't get away with it. They weren't ready to go public, but they were no longer in the dark. And somewhere in the silence, Elijah's voice still echoed, clear, unwavering, and impossible to forget. The call came just after sunrise. Jasmine had barely slept, and the soft ring of her phone felt heavier than it should have. She answered, expecting confirmation of the final logistics for Elijah's funeral. Instead, she was met with a calmly professional voice. Just letting you know, the man said Captain Monroe's burial has been moved to East Garden. She blinked, uncertain she heard correctly. I'm sorry, what? New layout came through last night. East Garden's been cleared. It's a quiet space. Quiet, she thought bitterly. Not peaceful, erased. East Garden wasn't just another section of the cemetery. It was the section whispered about. Years ago, when the city still codified its prejudices into policy, East Garden became the quiet segregation line. Black veterans were buried out of sight, far from the ceremonial pavilions under trees too dense to let light in. Jasmine's voice turned cold. That is not what we signed, not what my brother earned. The voice on the other end hesitated, then repeated, It's been updated. Thank you. She didn't hang up. She threw the phone down. By midday, she and Celeste were in the office of the cemetery's director. The air was thick with quiet resistance. Jasmine had brought the contract printed, highlighted, annotated in red. West Memorial Grounds, she read aloud, underlining the clause with her finger. It's not a suggestion. It's a binding agreement. And unless you'd like this funeral to become a federal case, I suggest you reverse that update. The director, a man in his 50s with gray at the temples and a practiced smile, shifted behind his desk. Must have been a clerical error, he mumbled. No, Jasmine replied. It wasn't. He signed the correction without argument. As they left the building, neither woman spoke. The sun was high, the grass clipped short, the air almost too still. Everything was in order, and yet, nothing felt right. A groundskeeper nearby was rinsing a headstone. He looked up as they passed. There was something in his eyes, concern, maybe curiosity. He hesitated before calling out, Excuse me, are you General Monroe? Celeste nodded slowly. My name's Mike. I've worked here over 20 years. I knew your son's name when I saw it on the burial board. He deserved better. Celeste's throat tightened. Thank you. Mike glanced around before lowering his voice. I probably shouldn't say anything, but last night 3 men came by, uniformed, said they were with security logistics for the funeral. But they weren't from here, didn't give names, didn't carry paperwork. What were they looking for? Jasmine asked. They kept asking where you'd be standing, exact positions, lighting, which way the flag would be presented. It wasn't about honoring your son. It felt like prep. He paused. One of them slipped an envelope under the office door. I didn't see what was in it, but it looked official. Jasmine's breath caught. That night, after the grounds had closed, she returned. With the help of the funeral coordinator, she gained quiet access to the director's office. Under a stack of administrative notices, she found it. A single sheet. No names, no seals, no header. But the design was unmistakable. A diagram of the West Memorial space, clearly labeled. Arrows marked the angle of the sun at the time of service. Boxes indicated personnel locations, flag team speakers, press. And in thick red ink, one zone was highlighted, right behind the spot where Celeste would be standing to receive the flag. It wasn't a layout, it was a target. She brought the paper home, laid it on the kitchen table. When Celeste walked in and saw it, her fingers froze in midair. I've seen papers like this, she said quietly. Combat pre-briefs, tactical setups. But this isn't a war zone, Jasmine said. Celeste didn't respond. They stared at the paper in silence. Then Jasmine picked it up, turned it over, blank on the back. Clean. No smudges, no handwritten marks, like it had been printed with care. Celeste touched the ink. Police-grade toner. Heat stamped. You don't get this kind of print from an office copy machine. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned. Later that evening, as the house settled into another too-quiet lull, her phone lit up with a call from Quan. "I intercepted something," he said. Encrypted message chain using old gatekeeper ciphers. Key phrases activated: crowd shift, frame control, target finality. It's happening. They're using Elijah's funeral as a stage. He paused. Celeste. This isn't surveillance. This is performance. For power. Celeste closed her eyes. She could already see it, the cameras, the silence, the officer walking forward. Every move choreographed to tell the world, even your dead belong to us. They want to reclaim the narrative, she said, make his burial about them. They've done it before, Quan replied. To families less visible. They hide behind process. They twist grief into spectacle. Celeste looked across the room. Jasmine had fallen asleep at the table, curled into her own arms. Elijah's photo still clutched beneath her fingers. Celeste's voice, when it returned, was a whisper wrapped in steel. They think they're burying a soldier, she said, but what they're really doing is waking the general. She walked over to the table and picked up Elijah's picture. The image was familiar, his cadet uniform, his smile a little crooked. She traced the corner of the frame and murmured almost to herself, they wanted silence. But you're going to speak louder than they ever imagined. And in that moment, in the stillness of her quiet kitchen, Celeste Monroe began preparing for battle. Not with weapons, but with truth, and with eyes wide open. The sun came late that morning, as if even the sky was reluctant to shine on what was about to unfold. Rows of chairs lined the edge of the West Memorial, every one of them occupied by friends, veterans, and families who knew Elijah or felt like they did. But something was wrong from the start. You could feel it. Black attendees were being stopped at the gates. Not once, but twice. IDs checked, bags opened, bodies scanned. Some were told to wait aside. Others were asked to leave altogether if they couldn't produce military credentials. Meanwhile, white guests in suits were waved through with nothing more than a glance and a nod. Jasmine tried to raise her voice, tried to ask why, but the officers guarding the gate wouldn't even look her in the eye. It was too coordinated, too clean, too intentional. Celeste stood alone beside the flag-draped casket. She hadn't spoken all morning. Her uniform was flawless, her spine straight, her hands still. But her eyes held back something that felt older than grief, something sharper than pain. When it was time, she stepped forward to the podium. The microphone crackled once, then went still. She looked down, then slowly unfolded a worn piece of paper, creased and faded at the edges. Elijah's handwriting, tight and slightly slanted, filled the page. Her voice when she spoke was soft but carried far. If you're hearing this, I'm already gone. And if that's true, then I need you to remember one thing: I'm not afraid to die. I was afraid to disappear. To be buried twice, once in the ground and once in the silence of a system that never meant to see me in the first place. There was a tremble in the crowd. Heads bowed, hands gripped tightly. A mother near the front wept into her gloves. A man in uniform closed his eyes. So don't remember me because I died. Remember me because I stood. Remember that I knew what they were doing, and I refused to let them own my voice. The words hung in the air. For a moment, time stopped, and then a sharp movement. Officer Kurt Delaney stepped out from the front row, not where the press or guests were, but from the off-angle left side where security had no reason to be. He wore a polished uniform, but it wasn't the uniform that drew eyes. It was the gun. He pointed it directly at Celeste. General Monroe. He barked, his voice loud enough to pierce the sky. You are under investigation for smuggling classified materials and potentially concealing a firearm at a military funeral. The gasp that moved through the crowd was instant. It wasn't just disbelief, it was a rupture. Like someone had snapped a wire stretched too tight. Jasmine jumped up, yelling, "She's unarmed. She's a mother at her son's funeral." Delaney didn't flinch. His hand stayed steady, aimed at Celeste's head. The honor guard froze. The guests stood slowly. A hum began, people pulling out phones, recording. Some whispered. Others shouted. One man started to step forward and was immediately pushed back by another officer who emerged from nowhere. Celeste didn't move. Her hands stayed by her sides, her eyes locked with Delaney's. She said only one word: coward. And then the shot. It didn't hit her. It didn't hit anyone. It went into the sky, a deliberate ringing sound that echoed across the memorial like a siren. A second officer, unknown, unseen until now, had fired upward from the trees behind the crowd. And just like that, chaos exploded. People screamed. Soldiers ducked. The press surged forward, lenses pointed wildly. Someone yelled, "Get down!" Someone else shouted, "He's got another one!" Children cried. Guests ran. In the middle of it all, Celeste was tackled from behind, pushed down so hard her head struck the corner of her son's headstone. Blood bloomed instantly dark against the marble. Her arms were twisted behind her cuffs, locked in place as she lay face down in the grass, inches from Elijah's name. Jasmine fought her way through the fray, screaming her mother's name, only to be yanked back by two officers who kept their grips too tight and their eyes too blank. Above them, a drone camera hovered, live-streaming everything. The footage hit social media before anyone could stop it. Thousands watched in real time as a black general was handcuffed on the grave of her son. Within minutes, hashtags began to trend. Screens around the world lit up with headlines. General Monroe detained at son's funeral. Allegations of weaponry spark chaos. A funeral erupts into a war zone. But none of that noise mattered in that moment. What mattered was Celeste lying still on the ground, not moving, not because she was broken, but because she refused to give them the performance they wanted. She wouldn't cry. She wouldn't plead. She just stared straight ahead, her breathing slow, her jaw tight, the red stain on her temple growing beneath her like a shadow. And in that stillness, beneath the riot, and the rage beneath the flags whipping in the wind, and the sirens approaching in the distance, there was only one thing left. Silence, the kind that comes right before something breaks wide open. The cold didn't come from the concrete walls or the metal bench bolted to the floor. It came from the silence. The kind of silence that waits for you to cry, then swallows the sound whole. Celeste sat in a paper-thin uniform with no rank, no insignia, no shield. They had stripped everything the moment she walked in. Her medals gone, her badge confiscated, her phone call denied. No explanation, no form, no lawyer, just silence and locked doors, and eyes, too many of them. She didn't speak when the guards barked her new number, didn't flinch when one muttered something crude under his breath. She just stood, shoulders squared like every war zone had trained her to do. But this wasn't war. This was the performance of power, the kind that doesn't need justification. Hours passed, or maybe days. It was hard to tell in a place where the lights never dimmed and the clocks never ticked. At one point, the cell door slid open and a woman walked in, built, solid, sharp eyes, short braids. She stared at Celeste for a long moment, then sat down on the bunk across from her. "I know who you are," she said. "Used to write letters to my baby brother when he was deployed. He said you gave the only damn speech that ever made him cry." Celeste didn't reply. The woman smiled. "Name's Teresa. My brother was Private Howard. Served under you. Didn't come home. But he died believing in someone. That someone was you." For the first time since the funeral, Celeste looked up. Her voice was low, cracked. "I'm sorry." Teresa shook her head. "Don't be. He would have done it again. Said you fought for us when no one else would. That's why you've got eyes on you in here. Not just theirs, ours." That night, a correctional officer paused by Celeste's cell. A woman mid-40s, stern face, eyes softer than her uniform allowed. She didn't speak, just passed a folded towel through the bars. Tucked inside was a small flip phone. Burned. No trace. Celeste hesitated only a second before flipping it open. One number programmed. Jasmine. The moment her daughter's voice came through, the silence cracked. "They're trying to break you," Jasmine said. "The footage, it's gone viral. Half the country is calling for your release. The other half wants you silenced." Celeste didn't waste time. Elijah was right. The silence isn't absence, it's strategy. She paused, then added, "They want me forgotten." Jasmine's voice trembled. "Then we'll make sure the whole world remembers." Before she could say more, a sharp knock on the outer door cut the call short. Celeste slipped the phone under the mattress and turned just as the cell door slid open. Another prisoner entered. Younger, tall, tense. Her eyes scanned the cell like a blueprint, calculating every step. Then she smiled, a slow, deliberate thing, and sat near the wall. 10 minutes passed, then 15. She didn't say a word. But just before lights out, she stretched. stood and leaned close enough for Celeste to hear her whisper. Got paid to make this quick, but I like watching people beg first. Celeste didn't move, didn't blink, didn't give her the performance. But the moment the woman took a step closer, Teresa appeared in the doorway, and she wasn't alone. 3 other inmates followed behind her, women of different ages, different stories, but the same quiet steel in their eyes. One of them, older, folded her arms. Not today. The new girl laughed. What, you her bodyguards? No, Teresa said. We're her soldiers. The woman hesitated, reading the room. Then she shrugged, muttered something under her breath, and walked away. Celeste exhaled, quiet, almost invisible. Teresa turned to her. You don't know what you meant to us. To women like us. You showed up when no one else would. You made us believe we weren't background. Celeste sat slowly. The ache in her body reminded her of every mile she'd walked in service. But something in her chest loosened a knot she'd been holding since Elijah's last letter. I didn't save anyone, she said. You didn't have to, Teresa replied. You showed us how to stand. In that cell in the belly of the very system built to erase her, Celeste Monroe found herself surrounded by the people the world had discarded. And they were standing guard. And for the first time since her son's casket was lowered into the earth, she knew she wasn't alone. They didn't apologize when they opened the door. No one ever does. Celeste stood in the same uniform they arrested her in, creased from the floor blood long dried at her temple wrists, still red from the cuffs. But this time she walked out on her own 2 feet. The order came from a federal judge, an emergency injunction, citing unlawful detention, lack of counsel, and serious concern for abuse of process. The wording was clinical. The silence that followed was not. Outside, the cameras were waiting. But Celeste didn't stop. She didn't speak. Just walked past the flash and the chaos until the noise faded behind her. They gathered in a borrowed church basement, low ceilings, plastic chairs, and the smell of wet cement. Jasmine had pulled strings for the space. Quan was already inside, pacing. Harris sat in the corner, quiet, staring at a map of Texas with pins driven through half its counties. No one smiled. Jasmine wasted no time. Her voice was low, but every word landed like a blade. When Elijah was deployed early, I was told it came from Central Command. But that memo didn't go through regular channels. It went through you. Harris didn't look up. Jasmine stepped closer. I checked the routing codes. You rerouted my brother under Langston's request. You knew what that meant. There was a beat of silence, and then Harris spoke softly. I thought I was protecting him. I thought, if I got close enough, I could control the damage. Instead, Jasmine said, her voice trembling, you handed him over. Harris stood. Not defensively, not with defiance, just quiet resignation. He walked to the table, placed a single folder down, worn edges, corners curling, and turned to leave. I failed him, he said. But I won't fail you now. Inside the folder was a map. Not just deployment patterns, not just names, but something far more intricate. A web, police departments, courthouses, contractors, names tied to sealed contracts, dates lined up with suspicious deaths, transfers, whistleblower reports that never made it to press. And at the center, one name circled twice, Chief Ronald Stokes. Quan stepped forward, hands shaking, and plugged in a USB. The voice that came through was gravelly familiar and unmistakable. We don't need him back. Put him out there. He wants to play soldier fine. Let the desert handle it. We push him forward and war'll do the rest. It was Stokes. No title, no filters. Just the voice of a man who'd made himself judge, jury, and executioner. Celeste stood in the corner, eyes fixed on nothing. Quan tried to soften the moment. We can release it anonymously, the press will eat it alive. But Celeste didn't answer. She turned slowly toward the window where the afternoon light was trying its best to pierce the basement gloom. No, she said. He took my son's voice. I'll be the one to take his mask. Jasmine stepped forward. You can't go to him alone. Celeste looked at her, calm and certain. Not alone, just prepared. From her jacket, she pulled a small recorder tucked into a patch pocket beside her medals. This time she said he'll speak for the whole world to hear. The office hadn't changed. Same sterile white walls, same framed medals hung just a little too perfectly. Same smell of cheap leather and old arrogance. Celeste walked in without knocking. Chief Ronald Stokes looked up from behind his desk, expression unreadable but not surprised. He didn't stand. You're bold, he said. I'll give you that. Celeste didn't sit. She let the silence stretch just long enough to remind him that she wasn't there to be measured. I came for answers, she said, her voice steady. You owe me that. He laughed. Not loudly, but with the kind of confidence that comes from decades of being untouchable. Answers. He leaned back, tapping a pen against the desk. You already know the truth. That's why you're standing here instead of mourning in silence. Celeste tilted her head slightly. Then say it. He shrugged. We don't kill people, General. We just shift them. Let the environment sort things out. His smile widened. Sometimes the desert, sometimes a courtroom, sometimes a funeral. He looked her in the eye. What happened to your son was unfortunate, but predictable. Celeste said nothing. She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. Her hand rested against the inside of her jacket thumb, lightly pressing the side of a tiny voice recorder already running. Stokes chuckled. Do you know what real power is, Celeste? It's not in the laws. It's in the silence between them. And people like you. You keep trying to shout through it. She turned to leave. No fight, no accusation, just a quiet nod. But by the time she stepped out of the building, the audio file had already been uploaded to a secure server. Within minutes, it reached 3 inboxes, one at the Department of Justice, one at a trusted contact inside the FBI, and one set on a time delay sent directly to major news networks. By sunset, the story was everywhere. Leaked audio exposes law enforcement official linked to extrajudicial deployments and racial targeting. General Celeste Monroe records explosive confession implicating statewide network. Cable news anchors struggled to keep up. Hashtags lit up like wildfire. But behind the scenes, it moved faster. The FBI raided 3 precincts simultaneously. Not quietly. Helicopters, black vans, perimeter lights. Agents moved in on known gatekeeper leaders, boxes of sealed records, seized encrypted files, copied servers removed in silence. The web Celeste had traced in whispers now tore open with sirens. And just as the shock began to settle, it happened on live television. Senator Jonathan Langston stood at a podium at Arlington, delivering a speech on national unity. Rows of veterans, solemn and quiet, stood below the stage. Then out of nowhere, 4 FBI agents in suits stepped through the crowd. Langston faltered mid-sentence. One agent whispered something in his ear, his face drained of color. They didn't cuff him. Not right away. But the moment his hands were guided behind his back on national broadcast, something shifted. The veterans below didn't move. They didn't clap. They didn't protest. They just stood in silence, because this time silence didn't mean defeat. It meant reckoning. In one day, the foundation of a hidden system cracked wide open, and at the center of it was a grieving mother with nothing left to lose, and everything left to fight for. The grass was greener now, not because the weather changed, but because someone finally took care of it. It had been a year since the funeral that never finished. A year since the tape. A year since the country stood still watching a woman in uniform get dragged across her son's grave. But the silence that followed didn't last long. The ground shifted, and so did the name carved in stone. It used to be East Garden Cemetery, that quiet little corner of Jefferson nobody ever questioned. Now, etched in bold black letters on a fresh white arch, it read, Heroes Memorial Grounds. No footnote, no irony, just truth standing where shame once did. They buried Elijah again that day. But this time they did it right. Full military honors. A 21-gun salute. Rows of flags all lowered in unison. The brass ensemble didn't play just a melody. It played memory of a life lost too early and a fight that reached far beyond one family's grief. Celeste stood in front the same way she did a year ago. Only this time the grief didn't paralyze her. It steadied her spine. Her uniform was pressed sharp as ever, but her eyes no longer had to hide behind duty. They were clear, firm, and quietly proud. When the folded flag was handed to her, no one interrupted. No hands hovered near their holsters. No silence dared to disrespect the moment. Just the slow ceremonial step of honor returning to where it belonged. And when the silence settled once more, a voice rang out this time through a microphone, not a scream. It was the president. No speechwriters, no applause cues, just plain words spoken like an oath. We failed a soldier, but through this law we promise not to fail again. Today, the Elijah Monroe Military Justice Act becomes law. It ensures that every American in uniform, no matter their color, rank, or background, is seen respected and protected. Not just abroad, but here, at home. The crowd stood, not for politics, not for performance, but for a promise finally kept. Celeste didn't speak right away. She walked to the edge of Elijah's new grave, knelt down gently, and placed her hand flat against the fresh stone. The same hand that once shook holding a flag. The same hand that once reached for her son's coffin and found a gun in its place. The same hand that now bore no trembling. She took a long breath, eyes closed, then spoke not to the cameras, not to the crowd, just to her son. You gave everything, Elijah. Not just your life, but your voice, your truth. They tried to erase you, to break me. But look around, baby. You're louder now than ever. Behind her, Jasmine stood beside Senator Ortiz and a dozen other families of black soldiers who had come to pay their respects not just to Elijah but to what he had exposed. Not a martyr, a messenger. A slow breeze rustled through the rows of flags as Celeste rose to her feet. She turned toward the cameras still rolling, toward a country still watching. Her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of every moment that brought her here. They wanted to kill the truth, but my son made sure it lived. She paused, then took a step back, resting her palm gently on the corner of the flag now in her arms. And finally, with a voice that had seen war buried a child and stood against a nation's silence, Celeste whispered the last words of the day. Justice, always in uniform. The salute that followed wasn't out of protocol. It wasn't commanded. It was earned. Not out of fear, not out of habit, but out of something deeper. Out of knowing that sometimes justice doesn't come with a bang. It walks in quiet. In boots, in silence, in mothers who refuse to forget. And as the camera zoomed out, panning over the flags, the crowd, the stone one last whisper remained echoing in the wind. Some truths wear medals, some wear scars. Hers wore both. Some stories don't end with justice. They begin with it. What Celeste Monroe stood for wasn't just her son's honor, but the dignity of every voice silenced too soon. This story reminds us that even in the face of power, truth has a pulse, and sometimes it marches in uniform. If this story touched you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories for more powerful stories that speak where silence used to live. Your support means everything. Every click, every share, every comment gives our team the strength to keep bringing you meaningful stories that inspire change. Because here at Mr. Mac's Stories, we don't just tell what happened, we remember what should never be forgotten.